The cold mountain wind howled outside the research station as Elena finished her late-night coffee. She had been working alone at the Meridian facility for 3 months now, and the isolation was starting to get to her. The Canadian Rockies looked beautiful during the day, but at night they felt like the edge of the world. Elena was a language expert who studied how different beings might communicate with each other. Most of her work involved computer simulations and theoretical models. She never expected to actually meet anyone from another planet. That was supposed to be someone else's job, someone more important than her. She was about to shut down her equipment for the night when something strange appeared on her screens. Energy readings were going crazy, showing patterns she had never seen before. The numbers kept jumping higher and higher, like something was trying to push through from somewhere far away. What in the world? Elena muttered, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. She had seen equipment malfunctions before, but this was different. The energy had a rhythm to it, almost like a heartbeat. The lights in her lab started flickering. Then they went out completely. Elena grabbed her flashlight, but before she could turn it on, the room filled with a soft, blue glow. The air itself seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Two figures slowly appeared in the middle of her lab, as if they were walking out of water. Elena's flashlight slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only stare at what stood before her. They looked almost human, but not quite. Both were tall and thin, with skin that seemed to change colors like soap bubbles in sunlight. Their eyes were huge, taking up much of their faces, and they sparkled like broken glass catching light. Most surprising of all, they looked exactly alike, like perfect twins. The beings stood perfectly still, their large eyes scanning the room. They moved their heads in perfect sync, as if they were sharing the same thoughts. When one tilted their head to the left, the other did the same at exactly the same time. Elena's scientific training finally kicked in. She raised her hands slowly, palms open, trying to show she meant no harm. "Hello," she said softly, her voice shaking. "I'm Elena. I work here. I study communication." The twins looked at each other, and Elena heard something incredible. They weren't speaking with their mouths, but somehow music filled the air around them. It wasn't quite singing, and it wasn't quite talking. It was like a conversation made of pure sound, with notes that rose and fell like a gentle song. One of the twins took a step forward, and the other matched the movement exactly. Elena realized they weren't just similar, they were perfectly synchronized, as if they shared one mind into bodies. The twin on the left made a gesture toward Elena, and both of them produced that musical sound again. This time, Elena could hear something like curiosity in it, maybe even concern. They seemed to be asking if she was all right. "You can understand me, can't you?" Elena said, still not moving from where she stood. "I wish I could understand you too." She slowly moved to her desk and picked up a tablet, keeping her movements smooth and non-threatening. The twins watched with intense interest as she pulled up a basic translation program. She pointed to herself and said Elena, then typed the word on the screen and showed it to them. Both twins stepped forward together, their musical voices harmonizing as they seemed to discuss what they were seeing. One of them pointed at the screen, then at Elena, then at themselves. They were learning. Elena realized with excitement they were trying to communicate. Over the next hour, Elena discovered that the twins were incredibly smart. They picked up on her attempts at communication faster than she could believe, using pictures, gestures, and simple words. She learned that they called themselves something that sounded like musical notes. Since she couldn't reproduce their real names, she decided to call them Zara and Keth. What fascinated Elena most was how they seemed to share everything. When Zara learned a new English word, Keth immediately knew it too. When Keth showed interest in something, Zara would look at it with the same intensity. They were like two parts of the same person. As the night wore on, Elena noticed the twins looking around her lab with growing wonder. They stared at her coffee mug as if it was the most amazing thing they'd ever seen. They were fascinated by her desk lamp, her books, even the simple poster on her wall showing different mountain ranges. Keth reached out carefully to touch a pencil on Elena's desk. The moment his finger made contact, both twins made a sound of surprise and delight. They looked at each other, then at Elena, their eyes wide with amazement. It was as if they had never seen such a simple object before. Elena realized these beings came from somewhere very different from Earth. Their movements were graceful but careful, like they were discovering physical objects for the first time. Their clothes, if that's what they were, seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. When Elena offered them water, they examined the glass with the same wonder they had shown everything else. They didn't seem to need food or drink the way humans did, but they were intensely curious about everything around them. As dawn began to break through the laboratory windows, the twins started making new sounds, longer, more complex musical phrases. Elena got the feeling they were trying to explain where they came from and why they were here. She wished desperately that she could understand them better. The twins seemed to sense her frustration. Zara approached Elena slowly and gently, touched her hand. Suddenly, Elena felt a strange sensation, like a warm breeze blowing through her mind. For just a moment, she could almost understand what they were trying to tell her. They were explorers, she realized. They had come from somewhere unimaginably far away, traveling between stars to learn about other forms of life. But something had gone wrong with their journey, and they had ended up here in her laboratory, in the middle of nowhere. But there was something else, something that made Elena's heart race with both excitement and worry. The twins weren't just curious about Earth, they were fascinated by her. The way she moved as an individual, the way she thought her own thoughts, the way she existed as a single being instead of a pair dot in their world. Elena understood somehow. Everyone existed in connected pairs. The idea of one person thinking alone, making decisions alone, was completely foreign to them, and they found it absolutely captivating. As the morning sun filled the laboratory, Elena looked at Zara and Keth, and realized that this encounter was going to change everything. Not just for science, not just for humanity, but for these two beings who had stumbled into her world and found something they had never imagined could exist. The twins looked back at her with those sparkling eyes, and Elena could see something new there, a hunger for understanding, a desire to learn more about what it meant to be human. She had no idea that this innocent curiosity would soon become something much more complicated and dangerous than any of them could imagine. 3 weeks had passed since Zara and Keth first appeared in Elena's lab. What started as a simple first contact had turned into something much more complex. The twins had shown no interest in leaving, and honestly, Elena wasn't sure she wanted them to go either. Every day brought new discoveries about how different their worlds really were. Elena had turned her research station into an informal cultural exchange center. She found herself acting like a tour guide for beings from another star, showing them the most basic things about human life. What surprised her most was how fascinated they were by everything, absolutely everything. That morning, Elena decided to introduce them to something she thought would be simple: breakfast. She made scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee, explaining each step as she went. The twins watched with the same intensity that scientists might use to observe a new species. Food is fuel for our bodies, Elena explained as she cracked eggs into a pan. But it's also about taste, smell, and enjoyment. Zara and Keth exchanged their musical communication, their harmonized voices creating a melody that had become as familiar to Elena as her own heartbeat. They didn't need food the way humans did. Their bodies seemed to draw energy directly from some unknown source. But they were absolutely captivated by the idea that humans combine survival with pleasure. When Elena offered them a small taste of scrambled eggs, both twins experienced the same reaction at exactly the same moment. Their eyes widened, their skin shimmered with brighter colors, and they made a sound Elena had never heard before, something like laughter mixed with surprise. "You like it?" Elena asked, smiling at their reaction. The twins looked at each other, then back at Elena, through gestures and the few English words they had learned. They tried to explain that, in their world, there was no such thing as taste for pleasure. Everything was purely functional. The idea that humans could enjoy something necessary for survival was revolutionary to them. Over the following days, Elena introduced them to music. She started with classical pieces, gentle piano music that wouldn't overwhelm them. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Both twins became completely still, their large eyes closing as they listened. Their skin patterns shifted and flowed in time with the music, creating a light show that matched the rhythm. But it was Keth who seemed most affected, while Zara listened with quiet appreciation. Keth appeared to be absorbing every note, every beat, every subtle change in the melody. Elena watched as he began to move slightly, not quite dancing, but swaying in a way that suggested the music was moving through his entire being. Music is how we express feelings, Elena explained, watching Keth's reaction to a gentle violin. Peace, happy music, sad music, exciting music, it all means something different. Keth tried to communicate something complex to Elena, his musical voice rising and falling with what seemed like excitement. Through their improvised sign language, Elena understood that in their world, all communication was functional. There was no art, no expression just for the sake of beauty or emotion. Elena then introduced them to visual art, showing them photographs, paintings, and simple drawings. Zara was immediately drawn to these, studying each image with intense focus. She seemed particularly fascinated by portraits, pictures of individual humans, showing different expressions. Each person is unique, Elena explained, showing them a collection of family photos she kept on her desk. We all look different, think different thoughts, feel different things. This concept seemed to trouble and fascinate Zara simultaneously. She would stare at the photos for long periods, occasionally reaching out to touch the faces in the pictures with gentle curiosity. Elena realized that Zara was trying to understand how beings could be so similar yet so individual. The breakthrough came when Elena introduced them to storytelling. She started with simple fairy tales, reading aloud while showing them picture books she had ordered online. The twins were mesmerized by the idea that humans created entire worlds in their imagination, just for entertainment. Zara became particularly interested in stories about individual heroes, people who went on adventures alone, made their own choices, and faced challenges by themselves. This was completely foreign to her experience, where every decision was shared and every action was coordinated with another being. As the weeks passed, Elena began to notice changes in the twins that made her both excited and worried. They were starting to show preferences, individual likes and dislikes, that weren't perfectly matched between them. Keth would spend hours listening to music even when Zara wanted to look at art books. Zara would get lost in stories while Keth practiced moving to different rhythms. More concerning was how they reacted when Elena tried to take breaks from their cultural sessions. If she needed to do her regular work or simply rest, both twins would become restless and agitated. They would stand by the windows, their skin colors dimming, making soft, sad musical sounds until Elena returned to share more human experiences with them. Elena started to realize that something unexpected was happening. The twins weren't just learning about human culture, they were becoming dependent on it, like people who discovered a new favorite food and couldn't stop eating it. Zara and Keth seemed unable to get enough of human experiences. She tried to introduce them to quieter activities, thinking they might need time to process what they were learning. But when she suggested meditation or simple rest, they became agitated. They wanted more music, more stories, more examples of how individual humans lived and thought and felt. The most alarming change was in how they interacted with each other. Elena began to notice small moments where they weren't perfectly synchronized. Keth might reach for something while Zara was looking in a different direction. Their musical communication, once seamless, now sometimes had slight delays or variations. One evening, as Elena was reading them a story about a young person going on their first adventure alone, she looked up to find both twins staring at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Their eyes held something she had never seen before, a kind of hunger. Elena, Zara said in her still developing English, tell us more about being alone, about thinking thoughts that no one else thinks. The way she said it sent a chill down Elena's spine. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. There was something deeper, more desperate in the request. Elena realized that she might have introduced them to concepts that were fundamentally changing them in ways she didn't understand. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She watched the twins through her laboratory window as they sat outside, looking up at the stars. But instead of their usual perfect synchronization, she saw something that made her heart race with concern. For the first time since they had arrived, Zara and Keth were looking in slightly different directions, as if they were each having their own individual thoughts about what they saw in the night sky. Elena began to wonder if showing them the richness of human individual experience had been a mistake. She had wanted to share the beauty of human culture, but what if she had given them something that was dangerous for beings like them? What if the paradise she had shown them was actually a trap they couldn't escape from? 2 months had passed since Elena first met Zara and Keth, and she was starting to feel like she was living in a completely different world. What had begun as an amazing scientific discovery was becoming something that kept her awake at night with worry. The twins had changed dramatically. Gone was their perfect synchronization, replaced by something that looked more and more like two separate individuals. This should have been fascinating from a scientific perspective, but Elena was beginning to understand that for Zara and Keth, becoming individual might be dangerous. That morning, Elena woke up to find Keth in her lab at 5 a.m., sitting on the floor with headphones on, moving his body in ways that looked almost like dancing. His skin was shifting through colors she had never seen before, deep purples and bright golds. That pulsed with the music. Keth, she said gently, not wanting to startle him. How long have you been awake? He pulled off the headphones, and Elena was shocked to see that his eyes looked different. There was something wild in them, something desperate. Music never stops in my mind now, he said in English that was getting better every day. Even when silent, I hear it. I need more. Always more. This was exactly what Elena had been afraid of. She had started noticing that both twins were showing signs of what looked like addiction. They couldn't seem to stop consuming human culture. If she tried to limit their exposure to music, art, or stories, they became agitated and unhappy. Zara was even more concerning. She had discovered human literature and was reading constantly, sometimes for 12 or 14 hours without stopping. She had moved beyond simple fairy tales to complex novels about individual human experiences. Elena found her that afternoon surrounded by 20 different books, her eyes moving rapidly from page to page. Zara, you need to take a break, Elena said, sitting down beside her. You've been reading for 2 days straight. Zara looked up, and Elena saw the same wild look that she had seen in Keth's eyes. Each story shows me a different way to be alone, to think private thoughts, Zara said. In my world, we share everything. But humans, you can have secrets, dreams that no one else knows. I want to understand all the ways to be individual. The problem was becoming clear to Elena. The twins weren't just learning about human culture. They were trying to transform themselves into individuals like humans, but their biology, their entire nervous system, was designed for shared consciousness. They were fighting against their own nature, and Elena feared it was hurting them. She started researching everything she could find about alien psychology and consciousness. Most of it was theoretical, but she found some disturbing information about what happened when beings tried to change their fundamental nature too quickly. The research suggested that consciousness wasn't just about thinking, it was physically wired into the brain and nervous system. If Zara and Keth were truly designed to share awareness, then trying to become individual might be like a human trying to grow a third arm. The body simply wasn't built for it. Elena's worst fears were confirmed when she noticed the twins starting to have what looked like seizures. It started small, just brief moments where one or both of them would stop moving, and their eyes would lose focus. But these episodes were getting longer and more frequent. One evening, while Keth was listening to jazz music, he suddenly collapsed. His body went rigid, his skin flickered through colors like a broken TV screen, and he made sounds Elena had never heard before. Not their usual musical communication, but something harsh and discordant. Zara immediately dropped her book and rushed to Keth's side. The moment she touched him, Both of their bodies began to glow with the same blue light that had appeared. When they first arrived, for a few seconds, they seemed to merge back into their original synchronized state. Then the light faded, and they separated again, both looking exhausted and confused. "What just happened?" Elena asked. Kneeling beside them, "When we are too individual for too long, our minds break apart." Zara explained weakly, "We are not made to be alone in our thoughts, but we cannot stop wanting to be." Elena realized she was witnessing something unprecedented and terrifying. The twins were literally addicted to human individuality, but their bodies were rejecting it like a poison. They were caught between their natural state, which now felt boring and empty to them, and an individual state that was slowly destroying them. The situation got worse when Elena discovered that the twin ship had been sending them messages. She found the communication device hidden in Keth's belongings, a small, crystal-like object that pulsed with soft light. When she showed it to them, both twins looked guilty and afraid. "Your people are looking for you," Elena said, studying the patterns of light in the crystal. "How long have they been calling?" "Many days," Keth admitted. "But we do not want to answer. If we return, we will go back to sharing everything. We will lose the feeling of being ourselves." Elena felt a chill of real fear. She had been so focused on the immediate health problems that she hadn't considered the larger implications. If these beings were important to their civilization, their absence might be causing problems for their entire species. Using the translation program she had developed, Elena managed to decode some of the messages. What she learned made her feel sick with guilt. Zara and Keth weren't just random explorers. They were something like navigators, or guides for their people. Their shared consciousness was part of a larger network that helped their entire civilization stay connected across vast distances. Without them, their people were becoming lost and confused. The messages spoke of ships losing their way, communities unable to coordinate their activities, and a growing sense of isolation spreading through their entire society. Elena realized that her innocent desire to share human culture had created a catastrophe. The twins were addicted to individuality. Their bodies were rejecting the change, and their absence was hurting their entire civilization. But they refused to go home because they couldn't bear the thought of giving up the intoxicating experience of being individual beings. That night, Elena found both twins sitting together, but looking in different directions. Keth staring at the music player, Zara holding a book, both lost in their separate worlds. They were becoming what they had always wanted to be, but the cost was higher than any of them had imagined. Elena knew she had to do something before it was too late. But what could she do? Force them to return to their people? Try to help them become individuals despite the danger? Or find some completely different solution that no one had thought of yet? Looking at Zara and Keth, Elena realized that showing them paradise had created the most complex and dangerous situation of her life. The twins had tasted individual consciousness and found it irresistible, but it might cost them their lives and destroy their entire civilization. Elena had become responsible not just for two alien beings, but for the fate of an entire species among the stars. Elena knew she had to act fast. The twins were getting sicker every day, their episodes happening more frequently and lasting longer. But every time she tried to limit their exposure to human culture, they reacted with something that looked like panic. That morning, she decided to try a gradual approach. "Maybe we should take a break from the music and books today," she suggested gently. "You both need rest." The reaction was immediate and frightening. Keth's skin turned a dull gray color, and he started making distressed sounds, not his usual musical communication, but something harsh and broken. Zara dropped the book she was holding and looked at Elena with what could only be described as terror. "No," Zara said, her English now almost perfect but her voice shaking. "We cannot go back to emptiness. Before we knew about being individual, we were like robots, just following patterns, never truly thinking our own thoughts." Elena watched as both twins began to pace around her lab, their movements jerky and uncontrolled. It was like watching someone going through withdrawal from a powerful substance. The comparison made Elena's stomach turn with guilt. "But you're hurting yourselves," Elena said. These episodes you're having, they're getting worse. What if something permanent happens to you? Keth stopped pacing and looked directly at Elena. What if going back to shared consciousness is the permanent damage? What if we can never again feel the joy of a song that only we hear? Or the excitement of a thought that belongs only to us? Elena realized she was dealing with something far more complex than simple addiction. The twins weren't just dependent on human experiences, they had completely changed their understanding of what it meant to exist. Going back to their original state felt like death to them. Desperate for help, Elena decided to contact other researchers. She sent carefully worded messages to xenobiologists, consciousness experts, and anyone who might understand what was happening. She was careful not to reveal too much, but she needed advice from people who understood alien psychology. The responses she got were both helpful and terrifying. Dr. Chen from the Institute for Consciousness Studies wrote back with disturbing information. Apparently, several other alien species had experienced what researchers were calling consciousness addiction. When exposed to certain aspects of human culture, humans generate a unique type of experiential complexity, Dr. Chen explained in a video call. Our individual consciousness, combined with our emotional range and creative expression, creates something that can be intoxicating to species with different neural structures. We've documented at least 12 cases where alien beings became dangerously dependent on human cultural experiences. Elena felt her heart sink. What happened to those beings? It varies. Dr. Chen said grimly. Some adapted successfully, but their original species often rejected them. Others tried to return to their natural state and experienced severe psychological trauma. And some, he paused, some died trying to change their fundamental neural structure. Elena ended the call feeling more worried than ever. But before she could figure out what to do next, the decision was taken out of her hands. She was awakened at 3 a.m. by a sound unlike anything she had ever heard. It was like thunder, but musical, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Elena rushed to her window and saw something that made her legs go weak. A massive ship hung in the air above her research station. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, made of the same shifting, color-changing material as the twins' skin, but enormous. The ship pulsed with the same blue light that had brought Zara and Keth to her lab. Elena found the twins standing outside, looking up at the ship with expressions of fear and defiance. They were holding hands, their skin glowing brightly as if they were trying to maintain their connection to each other, while also resisting something from above. The ship landed with surprising gentleness for something so large. A section of its surface flowed open like liquid, and 3 figures emerged. They moved with the perfect synchronization that Eleanor remembered from when she first met Zara and Keth. These beings were clearly from the same species, but they moved as a group, their consciousness seamlessly shared. The leader, Elena could tell by the way the other two deferred to them, approached slowly. They were taller than the twins, with skin that showed more complex patterns, and their eyes held an authority that was unmistakable. I am Voss, the being said, speaking English with the same musical quality as the twins, but with perfect pronunciation. I lead the search group sent to retrieve Zara and Keth. Elena stepped forward, trying to look calm despite the racing of her heart. I'm Elena. I've been helping them learn about human culture. Voss studied her with those large, multifaceted eyes. You have done more than that, Elena of Earth. You have shown them a way of being that is destroying them and threatening our entire civilization. The accusation hit Elena like a physical blow, but she forced herself to stand straight. I never intended for anyone to get hurt. I was just sharing our culture with them. Your intentions matter little, Voss replied, though not unkindly. Zara and Keth are crucial components of our navigation network. Their absence has caused 17 ships to lose their way in deep space. Our communities are struggling to maintain coordination. Your culture sharing is endangering thousands of lives. Elena looked at the twins, who had moved closer together, but were still maintaining their individual stances. She could see the conflict in their eyes. Part of them wanted to help their people, but they couldn't bear the thought of giving up their newfound individuality. We cannot return, Zara said to Voss, her voice steady but sad. We have tasted what it means to be ourselves. To go back to shared consciousness now would be like forgetting how to see color and living forever in gray. Voss made a sound of frustration, a harmony of voices that express both anger and grief. Then you choose to let our people suffer while you indulge in this dangerous experiment? It's not an experiment, Keth said, stepping forward. It's growth, evolution. We are becoming something new. Elena watched this confrontation with growing horror. She was witnessing a family torn apart by her actions. But she was also seeing something else. The twins weren't just being selfish. They genuinely believed that what they had experienced was valuable, not just for them, but potentially for their entire species. Voss turned back to Elena. There's technology that can restore the original consciousness patterns, they said. But it requires immediate action. Every day they remain in this individual state makes the process more dangerous. Elena felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her, forced the twins to undergo a procedure that would essentially kill the individuals they had become. Let them continue on a path that might literally destroy them, or find some other solution that no one had thought of yet. Looking at Zara and Keth, she realized that the paradise she had shown them had become a trap. They were caught between two worlds, unable to return to their original state, without feeling like they were dying, but unable to continue as individuals, without actually dying. The question that haunted Elena was whether there was any way to bridge these two forms of consciousness, or if someone would have to sacrifice everything for the others to survive. Elena stared at the standoff between Voss and the twins, her mind racing through possible solutions. Everyone was asking her to choose sides, but she couldn't bring herself to destroy either the individuals that Zara and Keth had become or abandon. They're people who desperately needed them. There has to be another way, Elena said, stepping between the rescue team and the twins. What if we don't have to choose between individual consciousness and shared consciousness? What if there's a third option? Voss looked at her with something that might have been curiosity. Explain. Elena's scientific training kicked in. From what I understand, your species evolved shared consciousness because it was useful for navigation and coordination across vast distances. But individual consciousness has its own advantages: creativity, adaptability, unique problem-solving approaches. What if we could find a way to combine both? Impossible, Voss said immediately. The neural pathways are incompatible. Attempting to maintain both states would destroy the mind entirely. But even as Voss spoke, Elena noticed something interesting. The twins had moved closer together during this conversation, and their skin was showing synchronized patterns again. They weren't completely individual. They were still connected to each other in ways that humans never could be. Wait, Elena said, watching the light patterns flow between Zara and Keth. You're still connected, aren't you? Even after all this time developing individual personalities, you still share something? Zara and Keth looked at each other, and Elena saw understanding pass between them in that instant. Wordless way that had nothing to do with their musical communication. We are connected, Zara admitted, but now we choose what to share and what to keep private. Before, we shared everything whether we wanted to or not. This gave Elena an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. What if the problem isn't that you've become too individual? What if the problem is that your people don't understand what you've learned? She turned to Voss. You said they're crucial for navigation because of their shared consciousness. But what if their new form of consciousness, individual yet connected by choice, could be even better for that job? Voss's skin shifted to darker colors, which Elena had learned indicated skepticism or disagreement. How could fragmented consciousness be superior to unified consciousness? Elena felt excitement building as the pieces of an idea came together. In her mind, because they've learned to think in ways that neither pure individual consciousness nor pure shared consciousness can achieve. They can be creative and adaptable like individuals, but also coordinated and connected like your shared consciousness system. She paused, knowing that what she was about to suggest would sound crazy. What if I underwent the same process? What if I learned to share consciousness the way you do? while helping Zara and Keth integrate their individual experiences in a way that doesn't destroy them. The silence that followed was deafening. Both the rescue team and the twins stared at Elena as if she had just suggested jumping off a cliff. "Elena, no," Keth said, his voice filled with alarm. "You do not understand what you are offering. To share consciousness with us while we are in this unstable state could tear your mind apart. And the procedure to create such a connection has never been attempted between different species," Voss added. "The risk of permanent mental damage is extremely high." Elena looked at all of them, the twins who had become so important to her, and Voss who was trying to save their entire civilization. "But what if it works? What if we create something new, a form of consciousness that can bridge both individual and shared awareness?" She could see that Voss was actually considering the idea. Despite the obvious dangers, even if such a procedure were possible, and even if you survived it, how would that solve the larger problem? "Our people need Zara and Keth to return to their duties." "Maybe they can do their duties better than before," Elena said. "Think about it. They've learned to see problems from individual perspectives while maintaining their connection to each other. That could be incredibly valuable for navigation and coordination." Elena spent the next hour explaining her theory to Voss, using every bit of scientific knowledge she had about consciousness, neural networks, and adaptation. She showed them how the twins had actually improved in some ways. Their problem-solving had become more creative, their emotional intelligence had grown, and their ability to understand different perspectives had expanded dramatically. Slowly, Voss began to understand what Elena was proposing. Not a return to the old way or a complete abandonment of their nature, but an evolution, a new form of consciousness that combined the best of both worlds. "The risk is enormous," Voss said finally. "If this fails, we could lose all three of you permanently, and if the procedure damages you in unforeseen ways, you could pose a danger to others." Elena felt fear rising in her throat, but she pushed it down. "And if we don't try, Zara and Keth will eventually die from the strain of fighting their own nature. Your people will continue to suffer without them, and we'll never know if there was a better solution." The twins looked at each other, and Elena could see them having an entire conversation without words, their old shared consciousness, working together with their new individual thoughts to reach a decision. "We want to try," Zara said finally. "But Elena, you must understand, if this goes wrong, you could lose everything that makes you human." Elena smiled, surprising herself with how calm she felt. "And if it goes right, we might discover something amazing about what consciousness can become." The procedure took place inside the alien ship, with technology that Elena couldn't begin to understand. She lay on something that felt like water, but supported her like a solid surface, while Zara and Keth positioned themselves on either side of her. "Remember," Voss said, "the goal is not to merge completely, but to create bridges between your different forms of consciousness. Elena, you must maintain your individual awareness while learning to share. Zara and Keth, you must balance your new individuality with your natural shared state." As the procedure began, Elena felt something indescribable happening in her mind. It was like suddenly being able to see colors that had never existed before, or hearing music that had more dimensions than sound should have. She could feel Zara's fascination with individual stories and Keth's love of music, but she could also sense the deep, peaceful connection that flowed between them. At the same time, she shared her own experiences, the joy of solitary discovery, the satisfaction of independent thought, and the uniquely human ability to create meaning from chaos. Instead of losing herself in their shared consciousness, Elena found that her individuality actually became stronger, more defined by contrast with their different way of being. And instead of forcing the twins back into pure shared consciousness, the process allowed them to maintain their individual insights, while reconnecting with their natural ability to coordinate and communicate. When the procedure ended, Elena opened her eyes and immediately knew that everything had changed. She could still think her own thoughts and make her own decisions, but she was also aware of Zara and Keth in a way that was deeper than any human relationship she had ever experienced. More importantly, she could feel that the twins had achieved what had seemed impossible. They were both individual and connected, able to be themselves while also being part of something larger. In the days that followed, they tested this new form of consciousness with navigation problems that had been challenging their civilization. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. The combination of individual creativity and shared coordination allowed them to solve problems that had been impossible for either pure individual or pure shared consciousness. Eleanor realized that what had started as a cultural exchange had become something far more significant, the birth of a new form of consciousness that could benefit both species. She had shown the twins paradise, but instead of it becoming a trap, they had all worked together to build a bridge between worlds. As Eleanor looked out at the stars from the alien ship, now able to sense the vast network of consciousness that connected their civilization across the galaxy, she understood that sometimes the best solutions require everyone to change, grow, and become something new together.